15 millionaire scientists failed until the new secretary revealed the secret no one had seen. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. This is unacceptable. Unbelievable. Incompetence squared. Robert Phillips' voice thundered through the conference room like a gathering storm, making the floor-to-ceiling windows seem to vibrate with the force of his fury. His tablet hit the glass table with such violence that several of the scientists physically flinched, their shoulders hunching as if expecting another blow. The sound echoed in the sterile silence that followed. A silence so complete you could hear the nervous breathing of 15 brilliant minds who suddenly felt very, very small. 15 scientists, Robert continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. 15 PhDs, 15 supposed experts in artificial intelligence, and not one of you can solve a basic stability equation for Philips Tech's AI module. The atmosphere at Philips Tech had been suffocating for weeks, but today it reached a breaking point. The scientists stood scattered around a whiteboard that looked like the scene of an intellectual massacre, complex calculations layered over frantic scribbles, arrows pointing in contradictory directions, entire sections crossed out in frustration. The math problem before them was the final key to unlocking a revolutionary AI system, a billion-dollar project that had consumed nearly a year of their lives and was now threatening to collapse under the weight of this single unsolvable equation. Dr. Williams, the technical director, cleaned his glasses for the third time in as many minutes, a nervous habit that had become increasingly frequent. Another scientist scratched the back of his neck raw, unable to meet the CEO's withering gaze. A young researcher named David stared at his shoes as if they held answers the whiteboard refused to provide. "You have 24 hours, Robert declared, each word dropping like a judge's gavel. "If no one gives me a concrete solution by then, every single one of you is fired. Do I make myself clear?" "Perhaps if we could step away for a bit," Dr. Williams ventured weakly, "clear our heads." "Go," Robert interrupted, his voice cold enough to frost the windows. "Go before I completely lose what little patience I have left." The scientists filed out like condemned prisoners granted a temporary reprieve, heads bowed, shoulders slumped. Some mumbled half-formed theories to each other. Others simply carried their frustration on their faces like visible wounds. Minutes after the last scientist disappeared, Rachel Collins entered the conference room to begin her evening cleaning routine. At 28, she had been Philips Tech's secretary for only 3 weeks, but she'd already learned to recognize the aftermath of Robert's explosions, the scattered papers, abandoned coffee cups, pizza crusts on expensive china, and crumpled napkins that marked the battlefield of brilliant minds under impossible pressure. Rachel surveyed the destruction with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. The whiteboard caught her attention immediately, and she found herself drawn to it despite having a dozen other tasks waiting. As a secretary, she wasn't supposed to understand what was written there, wasn't supposed to care about the intricate mathematical chaos that had defeated 15 geniuses. But Rachel had always seen patterns where others saw only confusion. Her eyes traced the equations following the logical flow, or rather, the logical failures. Variables tangled like Christmas lights stored by someone who'd given up on life. Functions that led nowhere. Attempts at solutions that collapsed under their own complexity. "What is this?" she murmured, stepping closer to the board. Her finger traced one particular section, and suddenly she saw it. The flaw, the missing link, the simple error that had been hiding in plain sight beneath layers of overcomplicated genius. It was like one of those optical illusions where once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it. The scientists had been so focused on complex solutions that they'd missed the obvious answer staring them in the face. "This is what's blocking all these elite geniuses?" Rachel said softly, almost talking to herself as she picked up a marker that someone had left rolling on the table. Doubt flickered through her mind for only a second before instinct took over. Her hand moved with surprising confidence, making small but crucial adjustments. She corrected an index here, repositioned a variable there, and realigned the fundamental structure of the equation with precision that came from seeing clearly rather than thinking hard. 2 minutes. Maybe 3 at most. Rachel stepped back, marker still in hand, and stared at what she'd done with a mixture of disbelief and certainty. "Done," she whispered. "Solved." That's when she heard footsteps behind her, the distinctive sound of expensive Italian leather on marble floors. Robert Phillips walked into the conference room, his expression still carrying the storm clouds of his earlier rage. He was halfway across the room when he stopped abruptly, his sharp eyes catching the changes on the whiteboard. "Who touched the calculations?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. Rachel froze, suddenly very aware that she was holding a marker and standing in front of equations worth potentially billions of dollars. "I did." Robert turned to her slowly, as if he'd just heard something so absurd it required careful processing. "You." His tone suggested she'd just claimed to speak fluent Martian. "Yes, sir." He blinked, took 3 measured steps forward, his eyes never leaving the whiteboard. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. "You touched this, thinking it would solve the problem?" "Not thinking," Rachel replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I solved it." Robert didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled his tablet from his jacket with the deliberate movements of someone trying very hard to maintain control. His fingers moved across the screen, entering the modified data into the AI model's core algorithm. Lines of code began responding, cascading across the screen in ways they hadn't before. He ran a comparison with the previous version, executed a simulation, and Rachel watched his eyes widen despite his obvious attempt to keep his expression neutral. "This," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "This is actually working." Rachel leaned against the conference table, crossing her arms with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "But if you prefer, you can erase it. It's just a secretary's scribble after all." Robert looked up from his tablet, and for the first time since she'd started working at Phillips Tech, Rachel saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. There was confusion there, and something that looked uncomfortably like uncertainty, an emotion she suspected Robert Phillips rarely allowed himself to feel. "You're coming with me tomorrow to the lab," he said abruptly. 8 o'clock sharp. "I want you to explain exactly how you did this, word by word, step by step." Without waiting for her agreement, because CEOs like Robert Phillips didn't wait for agreements from secretaries, he turned and left the room with the same intensity he'd entered it, taking his tablet and his shaken worldview with him. Rachel looked at the whiteboard again, then at the door where Robert had just disappeared, and let out a soft laugh while shaking her head. "I think I just hacked the brain of Mr. Ice Boss himself." The next morning, Rachel arrived at the lab at precisely 8 o'clock, carrying her brown leather folder and a coffee that could have doubled as a small bucket. The research lab was a completely different world from the administrative floors where she usually worked, all gleaming technology, massive monitors displaying incomprehensible data, equipment that looked like it belonged on a spaceship, and a silence so profound it felt almost sacred. Robert stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his team of 15 scientists who just 24 hours earlier had been on the verge of termination. Now they looked curious, skeptical, and perhaps a bit embarrassed as they waited to hear how a secretary had solved what they couldn't. "You're right on time," Robert said without preamble. "Rachel, I want you to explain to the entire team exactly how you solved the equation yesterday." Rachel glanced around the room, taking in the faces turned toward her, a mix of genuine curiosity, obvious doubt, and poorly concealed wounded pride. She took a deliberate sip of her coffee, buying herself a moment to find the right tone. "Good morning to you all," she said with a slight smile. "What a warm room. I can practically feel the love in the air." Dr. Williams cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Collins, Mr. Phillips mentioned you made some modifications to our work. We'd like to understand your thinking process." Rachel set her folder on a nearby table and turned to face the whiteboard, which still displayed her corrections. "My process." She chuckled softly. "You really want to know?" "We do," Robert said firmly, arms crossed in that classic CEO pose of contained impatience. "All right then." Rachel pointed to the board with the marker she'd picked up. "You were trying to force open a locked door when the key was already sitting in the lock. You were all so focused on creating complicated solutions that you forgot the basics." She circled a specific section. This variable was in the wrong position. It needed to be moved. That's it. Just moved. David, one of the younger scientists, frowned. Just moved? That doesn't make sense. We ran that configuration dozens of times. Yeah, Rachel shrugged. You ran it wrong. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted floor. Robert stepped forward. Explain more clearly. Rachel sighed, putting her hands on her hips in a gesture that made several scientists smile despite themselves. Imagine you're trying to open a can of food with a hammer, a screwdriver, and a blowtorch. You could spend hours trying different combinations of these tools, and technically, one of them might eventually work. Or, she paused for effect, you could just use a can opener. You were hammering away when the simple tool was right there all along. Jennifer, one of the senior scientists with impressive credentials from MIT, crossed her arms defensively. That's an extremely simplified way of explaining a highly complex computational issue. Sometimes, Rachel replied, taking another sip of coffee, the simplest answers are the ones that actually work. But if you'd all rather keep hammering, I'll gladly go back to my desk and let you play with your numbers in peace. Robert watched her closely, every gesture, every word, the way she moved through the room with unexpected confidence. Something about her simultaneously annoyed and fascinated him, which was a new and distinctly uncomfortable experience. Dr. Williams, Robert said, his eyes still on Rachel. Verify her mathematics again. The technical director sighed but complied, moving to his computer to enter the data and run comprehensive simulations. He checked the results 3 times, his expression growing increasingly surprised with each verification. When he finally turned back to the group, his face told the story before his words did. The mathematics is correct. Not just correct, it's elegant in its simplicity. Rachel gave a small, theatrical bow. Thank you, doctor. I'll be adding elegant with equations to my resume immediately. Robert felt that strange mix of irritation and curiosity intensifying in his chest. How could a secretary with no formal training solve in minutes what a team of PhDs couldn't crack in weeks? It violated every assumption he'd made about intelligence, education, and expertise. All right, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision he suspected he might regret. You'll join the project team. I'll what? Rachel nearly choked on her coffee. Temporarily, as an observation assistant. You'll attend our meetings and provide input when appropriate. The room filled with whispers. Rachel looked around, suddenly realizing she wasn't the only one shocked by this development. So I'm supposed to just sit there and watch you all work? She asked. Like some kind of mathematical voyeur? You'll attend meetings and contribute when your perspective is needed, Robert clarified. The company needs to understand how your mind approaches these problems. Rachel laughed. My mind works like anyone else's. You're all just overcomplicating everything. Dr. Williams stepped forward, his tone professorial. Miss Collins, do you have any background in mathematics, engineering, or computer science? I have a high school diploma and 2 years of business school, Rachel replied without a hint of shame or defensiveness. I dropped out to work because my younger sister needed someone to pay for her education. The silence that followed was thick with judgment, surprise, and confusion. Rachel felt their stares, knew what they were thinking. How could someone without proper credentials possibly contribute to their work? Look, she said, placing her coffee cup down with enough force to make her point. I'll join your project, but I have a few conditions of my own. Robert raised an eyebrow, a gesture that somehow conveyed both surprise and grudging respect. Conditions? First, I keep wearing my regular clothes. I'm not pretending to be a scientist in a lab coat I haven't earned. Second, I maintain my normal secretary hours. This project work is extra. Third, and here her voice took on steel, if anyone here treats me like I'm stupid just because I don't have a PhD, I walk right back to my desk and leave you all with your elegant equations. The room fell into that profound silence again. Rachel crossed her arms and waited, her posture making it clear she wasn't bluffing. Robert studied her face for several long seconds, seeing determination and confidence he hadn't expected from someone in her position. I accept your terms, he finally said. Dr. Williams looked like he wanted to protest, but Robert stopped him with a single sharp glance, the kind of look that had ended many arguments over the years. Starting immediately, Miss Collins will attend all project meetings. I want daily progress reports. Robert turned to leave, then paused. And treat her like the valuable team member she's proven herself to be. As the meeting dispersed and scientists began returning to their workstations, several of them glanced at Rachel with new, if cautious, interest. She had done something they couldn't, and in the scientific world, results mattered more than pedigree, at least, they were supposed to. Rachel gathered her folder, straightened her shoulders, and wondered what exactly she'd just gotten herself into. 3 weeks into her role as observation assistant, Rachel had become a fixture in the Phillips tech lab. She always sat in the same chair at the corner of the conference table, her leather notebook open and that pen spinning between her fingers whenever she was thinking hard about a problem. What had started as a temporary experiment was evolving into something nobody had anticipated. Rachel wasn't just making occasional contributions, she was fundamentally changing how the team approached obstacles. The team had been wrestling with a learning interface problem for 2 days when Rachel finally stopped spinning her pen and raised her hand like a student in class. Can I ask what you'll probably think is a silly question? Robert, leaning against the wall in his usual position of controlled observation, motioned for her to proceed. Why don't you just teach the AI to say, "I don't know"? Silence greeted her suggestion. What do you mean? Jennifer asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than defensive this time. Well, Rachel leaned forward, warming to her topic. When a child doesn't know something, they say, "I don't know," and then they ask someone for help. They don't freeze up or crash. Why can't the machine do the same thing? Dr. Williams blinked several times, his mind clearly racing through the implications. Are you suggesting we create a declared uncertainty protocol? I'm suggesting you stop trying to make the machine smarter than humans and instead let it be honest about its limitations, Rachel clarified. Let it admit when it's confused. David, the youngest scientist, slapped the table with sudden enthusiasm. That's brilliant. Simple, but absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Rachel smiled. Can I go back to spinning my pen now? Soft laughter rippled through the room, genuine amusement rather than the nervous, forced kind. Robert watched from his corner, trying to understand how she made everything seem so effortless, how she could make his serious team laugh even during high-pressure discussions. Over the following weeks, this pattern repeated itself with remarkable consistency. Rachel kept finding straightforward solutions to Byzantine problems, always with that touch of humor that somehow made the stress of a billion-dollar project feel manageable. Robert found himself noticing details he absolutely shouldn't be noticing. The way Rachel bit her lower lip when she was concentrating. How her eyes lit up with genuine excitement when she had an idea. The graceful way she moved her hands when explaining a concept. How she never flinched when he stared at her, instead meeting his gaze with a half-smile that made him feel both irritated and intrigued in equal measure. Mr. Phillips? Dr. Williams' voice cut through Robert's distraction. What do you think of Rachel's suggestion about the adaptive protocol? Robert blinked, suddenly aware he'd been staring at Rachel instead of listening to the technical discussion. Sorry, could you repeat that? I said, Rachel spoke slowly, clearly enjoying catching him off guard, that maybe we should test the new protocol in a controlled environment before rolling it out to the main system. But it looks like you were thinking about something much more important than our little AI problem. I was paying attention, Robert said defensively, but his tone lacked conviction. Sure you were, Rachel replied with that knowing smile. I bet you can repeat everything I said in the last 5 minutes. Robert stared at her, annoyed with himself for being distracted and annoyed with her for noticing. Go ahead and implement the protocol in the test environment. Next topic. Rachel smiled, clearly pleased she'd flustered the normally unflappable Sue, and went back to spinning her pen. Things came to a head on a Friday evening when the team gathered for what Dr. Williams called a celebration dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston. It's to celebrate our progress on the project, he explained. Everyone's invited. Dress code is business formal. Rachel looked down at her simple blouse and practical black pants. Formal, Formal, or formal for someone on a secretary's salary? Corporate formal, Jennifer answered with sympathy. Perfect, Rachel said dryly. I'll just raid my extensive collection of designer gowns. The truth was, Rachel worried about the dinner all weekend. She didn't own anything remotely appropriate for a high-end business dinner. After calling her sister Sarah for moral support and borrowing a navy blue dress from her neighbor Linda, she managed to assemble an outfit that was elegant without being pretentious. When Rachel walked into the restaurant on Monday evening, there was a moment of stunned silence. She looked completely different from the no-nonsense secretary they all knew, polished, sophisticated, carrying herself with quiet confidence despite knowing she'd borrowed everything she was wearing except her shoes. Rachel? David was the first to find his voice. Wow, you look amazing. Thank you. I'll take that as the compliment I hope it was meant to be. Robert watched her walk in and felt something strange in his stomach, not quite nervousness, not quite excitement, but something he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way she carried herself, the natural grace with which she navigated a world she technically didn't belong to. Throughout dinner, there was an awkward undercurrent to the evening. The other restaurant patrons kept glancing at their table, clearly curious about the beautiful woman dining with Phillips' tech's executive team. The maitre d' had treated Rachel with extra deference, assuming she was a senior executive rather than a secretary who'd borrowed her outfit. This is embarrassing, Rachel whispered to Jennifer partway through the meal. But you're doing great. I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're not pretending anything. You're just being yourself, which happens to be someone who solved problems 15 PhDs couldn't manage. Robert, sitting across from Rachel, found himself unable to focus on his food or the conversations happening around him. There was something magnetic about watching her navigate the evening with complete honesty about her discomfort, yet remaining graceful and witty throughout. Rachel, he said suddenly, interrupting a discussion about quarterly projections, what do you think of the project so far? I think you all overcomplicate everything, she said, cutting into her salmon with practiced ease. But you're getting better. Better how? You're spending less time arguing about impossible theories and more time testing practical solutions. That's definite progress. And what do you think caused that change? Rachel looked at him for a moment, sensing there was more to his question than simple curiosity. Maybe you finally realized the most complicated answer isn't always the right one. Or maybe we got a fresh perspective on the team. That too. The moment stretched between them, loaded with something neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Around them, conversations continued, but in their small corner of the table, time seemed to slow. As they were leaving the restaurant, a well-dressed woman approached Rachel directly. Excuse me, aren't you the new director of innovation at Phillips Tech? I heard they hired a brilliant young woman to shake things up. How bad is it? David appeared beside them, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of real concern. Bad, Tom admitted. They're hitting us from multiple vectors simultaneously. I've never seen anything like this. Livia barely heard them. She was in full crisis mode, her mind racing through defensive strategies and countermeasures. This was exactly the kind of challenge she trained for, the reason she'd spent countless hours studying advanced cybersecurity protocols. I need everyone to step back, she said, her voice cutting through the panic with surprising authority. And I need complete access to the network administrator controls. Livia, maybe we should call in external help, Tom began. There's no time, she interrupted, her fingers already working across multiple keyboards simultaneously. They're trying to access the client database. If they succeed, Miller Technologies won't survive the lawsuit, never mind the reputation damage. David was watching her work with fascination. Gone was the nervous, clumsy woman from the airplane. In her place was a focused, brilliant professional who seemed to intuitively understand complex systems in ways that left him slightly in awe. For the next 3 hours, Livia orchestrated a digital battle that would have impressed military cybersecurity experts. She built layered defenses, created decoy targets to misdirect the attackers, and systematically closed every vulnerability they tried to exploit. Her colleagues gathered around her workstation like she was performing surgery, watching in amazement as she outmaneuvered hackers who clearly hadn't expected to meet someone of her caliber. "There," she said finally, leaning back in her chair with exhaustion. "The last of their access points is closed. All systems are secure, and I've implemented additional protocols to prevent this type of attack in the future." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause from the IT team. Tom was shaking his head in disbelief, and David was looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "That was..." David began, then seemed to lose words. "Incredible doesn't begin to cover it." Livia felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by the familiar flutter in her stomach at the admiration in his voice. But before she could respond, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. "Livia Martinez?" The voice was professional, female, with a slight German accent. "Yes. This is Dr. Elizabeth Weber from Tech Solutions Berlin. I understand you just successfully defended against what our sources indicate was one of the most sophisticated corporate cyber attacks in recent history." Livia blinked, suddenly aware that David and half the IT department were listening to her conversation. "Yes. How do you know about that?" "Word travels fast in our industry. Ms. Martinez, I'm calling to offer you a position heading our new cybersecurity division. The salary is 3 times what you're currently making, plus full relocation assistance to Berlin." The offer hit Livia like a physical blow. 3 times her current salary. A chance to lead her own team. International experience. Everything she'd dreamed of when she'd first started her career. She began, glancing around at the faces watching her. David's expression had gone carefully neutral, but she could see something that looked like disappointment in his eyes. "You don't need to answer now," Dr. Weber continued. "But I hope you'll consider it seriously. Someone with your talents shouldn't be wasted on routine IT support." After ending the call, Livia found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations and asking about the offer. But all she could focus on was David, who had stepped back from the group and was watching her with an unreadable expression. "We need to talk," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her stomach drop. David's office felt different at night. The city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows created an intimate atmosphere that was far removed from their usual professional interactions. Livia stood near the door, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with job performance. "Quite an evening," David said, moving to pour himself a glass of water from the sidebar. "You saved the company tonight. You know that, right?" "I was just doing my job," Livia replied, though she felt a flush of pride at his words. "No, you weren't." David turned to face her directly. "What you did tonight went far beyond routine IT support. You single-handedly defended against an attack that could have destroyed us." He paused, studying her face in the dim light. "Which makes the timing of that phone call rather interesting." Livia felt her cheeks warm. "David, I didn't seek that out. I had no idea." "I know," he said quietly. "But you're considering it." It wasn't a question, and Livia found she couldn't lie to him. "It's an incredible opportunity." "It is," David agreed. "Berlin's beautiful. The tech scene there is cutting edge. And 3 times your current salary." He let the words hang in the air. "But," Livia prompted, hearing something in his tone. David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "But I don't want you to go." The admission hung between them, loaded with everything they'd been dancing around since that first day in the office. Livia felt her breath catch. "David, I know we agreed to keep things professional," he continued, turning back to her. "I know you're right that it's complicated. But Livia, what we felt on that airplane, what happened between us, that doesn't just disappear because we're trying to ignore it." He took a step closer, and she could see the honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability that his usual confident demeanor hid. "I'm not asking you to turn down the job offer because of me," he said. "That wouldn't be fair. But I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, what we have here is worth exploring. Even if it's complicated. Even if it's risky." Livia stared at him, her heart racing. Everything logical told her to take the Berlin job. It was safe, straightforward, A clear path to career advancement. But looking at David now, seeing the man behind the CEO facade, she realized that logic wasn't the only factor worth considering. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. David smiled then, that devastating smile that had first caught her attention at 30,000 feet. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending that the airplane bathroom never happened. I'm suggesting we see where this goes, professional complications and all." He moved closer, close enough that she could catch that familiar scent that had nearly undone her on the plane. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the best things in life are worth taking a risk for." Livia looked up at him, seeing not just her boss but the man who had talked her through her panic, who had kissed her like she was precious, who had just watched her save his company and looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "This is probably a terrible idea," she said softly. "Probably," David agreed, reaching up to cup her face gently. "But then again, the best love stories usually are." "See you tomorrow then." "Tomorrow." As Rachel walked toward the exit, she stopped and turned back. "Robert? About what you said about your father and success, you know you don't have to prove anything to anyone, right?" Robert looked at her for a long moment. "Good night, Rachel." "Good night." She left, and Robert stood alone in the empty lobby, watching her disappear into the night, feeling more uncertain about everything than he had in years. 2 months after the elevator incident, Rachel arrived at work to find chaos. An article in the Boston Business Journal had leaked the story of Phillips Tech's secretary without a college degree who solved problems 15 PhDs couldn't. The article wasn't overtly cruel, but its condescending tone and focus on Rachel's humble background and lack of qualifications had sparked a wildfire of online commentary. Social media was brutal. "This is the quality of experts at Phillips Tech? A secretary solving AI problems? What a joke. Probably just luck. Anyone can guess right sometimes. Must be desperate to hire just anyone." Rachel read the comments in the lab, surrounded by her now supportive colleagues, and forced a smile. "I've heard worse. I'm not going to fall apart over some internet trolls." But when Robert arrived, furious about the leak and ready to sue the newspaper, Rachel stopped him. "You're not suing anyone. They didn't publish anything false. I really am a secretary without a degree who solved your problems. Those are facts." "But the tone is their problem, not ours. Suing will just bring more attention." Robert stared at her, frustrated that she wouldn't let him fix this. But Rachel was tired of being treated like a victim who needed protection. "The problem," she said, looking around at all the concerned faces, "is that you're all treating me like I need defending. Like I can't handle criticism on my own." "Rachel, it's normal to care, Jennifer started. "Is it? Because yesterday you all treated me like a fun curiosity, and today you're treating me like a fragile child." "That's not fair," Robert protested. "Isn't it? Then why is everyone walking on eggshells? Why do you think I can't handle a little criticism?" Her words hung in the air, uncomfortable and true. "Look," Rachel continued, calmer now, "I appreciate the concern. But I don't need defending. I need to be seen as an equal." Robert frowned. "That's how I see you." "No, Robert. You see me as a puzzle to figure out, an interesting case study. But not as a colleague." "That's not." "Yes, it is. If this were Dr. Williams being attacked online, you wouldn't offer to sue the paper. You'd tell him to ignore it and move on." Robert opened his mouth to object, then closed it. She was right. "So what do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to stop trying to rescue me and start treating me like someone who can rescue herself." The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, Rachel grabbed her bag. "I'm going home. I need a few days to think." "Rachel, we have the Harrison presentation Monday. You'll have to do it without me. You can't just walk out." "Yes, I can. I need time to decide if continuing here is worth being treated like a circus act instead of a professional." She walked out, leaving stunned silence behind. Robert stood frozen, then ran after her. "Rachel, wait." She was already in the elevator, pressing the close button repeatedly. "What do you want, Robert?" "You're right about everything." The doors started closing. "I know I am. That's why I'm leaving." Robert put his hand on the door to stop it. For how long? I don't know. Maybe for good. You can't. I can and I will. She gently removed his hand. Until you understand the difference between needing my insights and actually valuing me as a person, it's better I stay away. The doors closed, leaving Robert alone in the hallway, finally understanding what he was about to lose. What Robert didn't know was that he had 1 week to figure out what really mattered to him, and whether he had the courage to fight for it. What did you think of Rachel and Robert's story? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring love stories that prove intelligence comes in many forms.